Connie.
Here we are in the studio with Diane Black. First, I want to thank you for letting us come in, letting the Tri-Art Gallery team be a part of this intimate space, and to be our first featured artist in that complete artist series. It's a pleasure to work with you. We're going to have a little intimate conversation. Hopefully, I'm able to draw some things out of you, and that you'll give us insight into your creative process, who you are as a multifaceted artist, and who you would like us to see as a multifaceted artist. Okay.
Well, this is kind of slightly intimidating and very exciting.
That's good.
Absolutely.
That's what we want. Great. Great. So my first question, I was thinking about what I was going to ask you, because I do know you, but not as intimately as every time I come in here I find out something new about you. So how does Diane describe Diane as an artist?
Yeah, I've always really struggled with that, because I remember my teacher once telling us that you shouldn't describe yourself as an artist. You should wait for other people to describe you as an artist.
Yeah, I
so
like
you
that.
go to work. You go to work. If other people see art coming from that work, then that's great. So when people ask me what I do, I typically say I have a studio practice or a full-time studio practice, and that I like to work with paint and sculpture, and I like to teach. And then usually by that time their eyes glaze over and we're on to something else anyway.
That's lovely. That's perfect. As I said, my first interaction with you was actually in the trades. It's where you actually were doing some electrical work.
Yeah.
And people know you from that era.
They do.
And then I went to an art school, sort of speak. It was in Westport, and there you were again.
Uh-huh.
And I was like, I've seen this woman. What is she doing here?
Yeah.
And then you came, you actually were working for Tri-Art at one point, teaching.
That's right.
And so and every time I talk to somebody about you, I find out another thing you've done. For example, you did welding. I think you've done some building. I think you were building a straw bale house when I first heard of you. I came in this morning and you had an ironing board out, and it turns out you were sewing in here. So you are a painter, an illustrator, ceramic artist, or I don't know what you call that. I don't want to say it because I know you do functional art and fine art sculptures.
Right.
You do printmaking. You do watercolors. You do oils, acrylics. Life drawing is a passion. So let's delve into some of that, if we can. Like, how do you know which media is to be decided?
So when you say all of that, it sounds as if I have a very short attention span.
No,
And that's partly true, but it's not because I get tired of what I'm doing. It's because I'm interested in many things. And I always feel like if I'm inspired by something, I want to respond to that inspiration in the most appropriate way. So if that inspiration comes from a black and white sort of landscape, then I might respond in a printmaking way. If it comes from an interesting face that I've seen, then I might want to do an oil portrait. Most often when it's just something that's my thoughts or my own sort of inner life, it comes out as sculpture.
Oh, is that interesting?
Yeah, because then I can
tactile, and you're using your hands.
I'm using my hands, and I can create an object or a scene or a life out of nothing.
Wow.
Right. So that it just depends on where the inspiration comes from.
Oh, that's very interesting. Yeah. And I didn't mean that when I was saying. I guess what I was trying to show is the depth of your experience, rather than your, attention span issues, which I don't assume you have. Because I think to be a complete artist, you can't just do one media. You've got to be able to know what's out there. It's just like when people do abstract art, it's important for them to learn the fundamentals and what they are deconstructing.
Right.
And for you to be able to use all this different media, I think is a blessing,
Yeah.
like as an artist.
And there's the other thing about being challenged, right?
Yeah.
So some things I find easier to do than other things. So at times, I'm like, I don't need any more challenges. I just want to do what feels natural. And that usually is clay. And often it's the functional stuff, right? Where I'm repeating myself and I'm really just sort of getting into a rhythm, and it's not super challenging. I find painting, and particularly portrait painting, to be really challenging. So sometimes I'm just up for a challenge. I'm desiring something that really pushes me and stretches me, and that's when I'll perhaps be more interested in doing a painting.
The show that you're doing at the gallery is called Making Faces. And when you look around your studio and at all your work, whether it's an animal or something that's illustrated, there is a face. What is it, or do you even have the language, because it may be more intuitive, is it about faces that compels you to want to capture them?
It is very much about faces. And it's because I think largely it stems from the fact that I really like people, and I like watching them, and I like to observe their expressions, and I'm always trying to read people.
Interesting.
Yeah,
Yes.
I know.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah.
But what comes out of that is because I'm observant in that respect, when I am able to recreate that kind of conversation with a piece, then it's a thrill for me, right? So it's a little woo.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow,
So it is
that's
very much about faces. It's not a passive thing that I just like faces. It's a very active thing, and it's very much about the conversation I have with the piece that I'm creating, whether it's a painting or a sculpture or anything like that. Yeah.
And do these works, I was just thinking, like, you're so intimate with it and you're creating it and you get a charge when it turns out, is it hard to let them go? Or are some of these company for you? Like, is it full of memories? It's almost like you're living a photo montage of people that have entered your life or not entered your life.
Sometimes it's actually very hard to let them go. But I'm intrigued by what other people see in them as well. So usually when a piece goes to somebody else, I've seen a connection. Because most of my work is sold in shows and that sort of thing, I often have some interaction with the purchaser. Not always, but I often do. And so I have the opportunity then to kind of sit back and watch them interact with the piece before they make what is often a very big decision to take it home.
Wow.
Right. And I understand very well how so many people will connect with a piece and not want to bring it home, because sometimes it's just a little bit too intimate or a little bit too well, even verging on creepy, but it's a lot of people want art that doesn't challenge them too much, right?
Yes, right.
So when somebody wants to take it home, they're looking for something that they're challenged by or interacted with in a certain way. Yeah. So that in itself is a very rewarding thing.
Yeah.
So letting it go, although I feel like I often have a bit of a tug at my own heartstrings, I do feel that it's an appropriate thing to do too.
Wow.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's interesting. And it's next you'll tell me you study psychology that I don't know about.
No.
Okay.
No.
Because going back to this, and we will talk about your other works, but as we're still focusing on the portraits, thematically, they're different. They're storytelling, and I can tell that you do enjoy a story. You enjoy people's stories.
Yes.
And I love that.
Yes.
But there's also another motif we have to talk about with a lot of your female figures, which is the bright blue eyeshadow and the ruby red lipstick. Even whether they look like the figures are elderly or if they're young, that theme seems to be there, and it gives it a bit of a lyrical, yet I don't know how to describe it. Can you talk about how that permeates through a lot of your work?
Yeah, it's one of those things that's just kind of a brazen thing to do, right? Like
Totally.
I would never wear bright
Well,
blue
I was saying, like,
eyeshadow.
look at you there.
I
Like,
never have the guts to do that. But I can create a character that would do that, right? So, so I am stepping outside of my own comfort zone very often when I'm creating faces and giving them maybe a little bit of badass that I don't have or something.
Fun.
Right? So, but also sometimes it's just as simple as I saw somebody wearing bright blue eyeshadow and I thought, oh, I love that color.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah.
You
So
know,
yes,
sometimes
yeah.
it's really simple.
Yes.
And it's just it's
Well, and it's a
absurd.
nice, it's like a surprise against the clay a lot of the time. They'll be monotone, and then those
Yeah.
eyes show up and those lips.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
it just makes you like, whoa, who's
Yeah.
that character? Yeah, it is very, like, I like that idea that you're talking about the characters. So it is like you're creating different stages or vignettes a lot of the time. Like some of them, the characters are running or they're doing different things, which I find.
Yeah.
Do you write? Do you write stories as well?
No, I often journal,
Yeah.
but I don't write stories. I think I don't feel as rewarded by words on pages as I do with images.
Visuals. So you're more of a visual
Yeah.
storyteller. in
I
many
am
ways.
really,
Yeah.
and I always say that words are not my first language.
Oh,
So
interesting. That's
yeah.
I gotta take that.
Well, no, I know, and since I started saying that, I've actually heard other people say that, and often they're people that describe themselves as visual thinkers. But the process is to see an image and then interpret it into words. Whereas I think a writer sort of goes the other way,
Yes.
creates an image with words.
Yes. Where does your creativity, like where does the start of something? Because as we're drinking out of these lovely functional art that you create, because this is sort of a way for you to keep and to fulfill your other fine art. We're going to talk about that dichotomy and how you balance that and how you're inspired to do the fine art, if we'll call it that. Is it through, again, we talk about observation, imagination? Is it a combination?
I enjoyed art in high school and decided that didn't necessarily seem like a great career choice, but it was where I was headed anyway. And I took a year of fine arts, and it wasn't structured enough for me. It was a little bit too theoretical and not as practical as I liked.
Right.
So then I shifted into the illustration program at Sheridan College, and I fell madly in love with the process of telling stories through illustration. And part of that course was that you were to create the image using whatever materials were appropriate for that story, right? So that really instilled in us I guess curiosity about other materials. So it wasn't just about paint, or it wasn't just about sculpture. It wasn't just about any one particular thing.
You were introduced,
it could be about
yes.
string. It could be about anything, as long as you were telling the story. And
Yeah.
it's funny how those early days kind of evolve but repeat themselves, right? So now I use totally different materials, but I still have this desire to tell stories with whatever materials I'm using.
We talk about your storytelling.
Okay.
Let's talk about this figure here.
Because she has bright blue eyeshadow.
Bright blue eyeshadow.
Yeah.
She looks a bit like she's part of a burlesque or a circus.
Yeah.
What's her
Well, there's several stories actually that
Oh,
can go
good.
back to her. So one of them is, when I was doing figures, I would often have, because I like life drawing, I would also often have naked figures. And my daughter at the time was like, Mom, can you please put clothing on them? So then I started to put bathing suits and whatnot on them. So that's why she's in the sort of bathing suit kind of outfit. But there's a couple of other things that happen too. I love the way an aging body sort of changes shape and folds in on itself, right?
Yes.
So taking a sort of a glamorous, what may have at
With
one
her
time been
pumps.
a glamorous person, and just adding a little bit of
Time,
flesh and
yeah.
letting gravity kind of,
Yeah.
like exploring what gravity would do to it. But then, because gravity becomes important in her fleshiness, I love the idea of putting it on the wall, and then then it's all about the surprise of having weightlessness in a very weighty body. Right? So
nice.
I'm always sort of like, how do I work with, what's the surprise here? What's the unexpected? How do I push
Right, and she does have some, well, she does have this movement, yes.
Yeah.
Oh, I
That's right.
love it.
Yeah.
I love it.
So all of these things sort of come together and then become signatures in a lot of what I do.
Yes. Well, and she's smiling. Look, she's happy with who
Yes.
she is right now.
So if you're following,
Yes.
typically you're unsettled by that.
Yes.
But what if you were comfortable with that? Yes, typically there is a
Yes.
serious message. And sometimes I try really hard to be really serious, and then it sort of all falls apart and it ends up being something slightly amusing. But typically there is some sort of a serious message.
So now we're to talk about the direction of your current work.
Okay.
Where is the inspiration coming from? Up here on the wall, we have a whale and an infant, and I see a lot of newborns.
Yeah.
What's going on with Diane now?
Well, about 4 months ago, I became a grandmother.
Yes.
And I was just sort of consumed with this juxtaposition of a new life and all of my concerns with the environment. So it's a challenging time because I'm elated with this new role that I have. I'm mesmerized by this creature that is so perfect and so beautiful, and yet I'm terrified
for
about
the future.
what her future holds.
Right.
And so I don't want that terror to take over the sort of the fun of being a grandmother and the joy.
Right.
So working through that in my artwork is actually one way of dealing with that. So I've been doing a lot of babies, like sculpting a lot of babies. At first I thought, well, that's kind of a silly thing to do, but then I thought, well, it's where my head is, so I might as well go with it. And I really enjoyed just working with these little babies. But like if you look at the whale with the baby on it, I really want the experience of being a child with those wonderful creatures that we have now,
Yes,
right? Like
right. Yes.
that experience is really, really interesting and important.
Yeah.
So again, there's a storytelling aspect to it.
It's like there's an edge to it. There's like a...
But there's
yes.
a message.
Yeah, there is a
right?
message
There's
there.
A message.
Yes.
Yeah.
We briefly touched on earlier, you're doing functional art and doing fine art, and that the functional art actually is almost meditative because it's repetitive and you know what you're doing. It's a go-to. But how do you, as an artist, balance and which audience you're creating for?
Yeah.
Because even though these are functional arts, they also have a very individualist, like they're not your normal mass-produced mug
Right.
or other objects that you make. So how do you do that balance, and how do you get inspired for both audiences?
Yeah, so doing functional work is interesting because you kind of have to put your ego on the back burner, right? Because ultimately, no matter what you decorate it with or how you decorate it, it has to function well, right? So
Yes.
the design of it has to be practical. It has to feel good in your hands. It has to have the right weight. It has to be able to have the right feel on your lips when you put it to your lips. It has to carry the right amount of liquid. All of these things are crucial because it
And the average
functions.
person doesn't think about them.
No, typically not, although the average potter certainly does.
Oh yeah, well, I think it's a whole different breed.
Yeah.
Yes, but-
So the challenge for me then is to create objects that I want to use, right? That I feel have the right feel and function, feel and function. But then because I've got this object now, what happens if I don't glaze the outside? So this is where I go, right? What
Yes.
happens if? What happens if I just put a slip on the outside and then I use my underglaze pencil and I really feel like I want to draw these days. So what happens if I use this functional object to satisfy my desire to draw.
Different
right?
surface, different substrate.
So then I think, okay, well, what's really present is the crows that I see every day on my walk, right? So they're present in my mind. So now I'm thinking about crows and I'm thinking about drawing, and I happen to be in a phase where I'm doing a lot of functional work. So that's what ends up on my cup.
So So each one of these is also a visual diary of Diane.
They're very much so.
And what's happening in her life at that time, and what's visually appealing to her.
That's
at that
right.
time.
What's visually appealing to me at that time, exactly. Yeah.
Yes.
And so it should be market driven, but unfortunately I'm not very good at that. So like somebody said to me, she said, dogs sell really well, so you're not doing dogs. But I like being with what is capturing my attention at that time.
Consuming your mind.
And consuming my mind, yes. But there's very much an overlap, right? Because I have to have the discipline to do something that works functionally, and then I give myself room to play on that surface.
So you let both. There's not a pure membrane there. They
No,
sort of
they
go
back and forth. Yeah.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
Okay. The other thing I would like to talk about is you recently went to Iceland.
I did, yes.
And this is going to lead us into talking about what's next for Diane Black, creatively wise.
Right.
So you went to Iceland.
Yeah.
And this, I don't know how much of the story you want viewers to know. It's very exciting, but it's also a very personal journey.
Yeah.
So tell us what you would like about that.
Well, turns out I have long lost cousins in Iceland, and so my trip to Iceland was actually a bit of a trip back through time in my family as well, which was super exciting and so rewarding and so wonderful. So now this rugged landscape, which reminds me of my childhood in Newfoundland, because I grew up in Newfoundland, right?
Well, yes, there is a definite geographical connection there.
There's definitely.
Yeah.
So a lot of it was reminiscing about my childhood, and then the extension of family in Iceland. So my uncle had children in Iceland who are approximately my age, a little bit older, and we didn't really know about each other until about 3 years ago. So this summer I had the opportunity to visit them and kind of fall in love with both them and the Icelandic landscape at the same time. Because there was always a lot of family around. Every morning I'd go out and do a quick sketch, right? So sometimes the weather was not conducive, but that's part of the experience, right? This one got absolutely saturated. And then this one I actually...
are you out in the rural parts then?
Yes, they live on a farm. So all of these are a farm that is actually on the ocean as well.
Wow.
Yeah, wow. This one also got drenched, and this one I gave up on.
Yeah. Oh no, I love that. Look at this. I love those rocks in this area in here. There's the looseness of this.
So that's the beauty of watercolor, right? You it's easy to transport. Yes. You take it out into the field. If it's drizzly, it's actually okay. Oh,
it is
right?
okay.
It's totally okay. It does loosen you up.
I really love this.
Yeah.
And those clouds like that.
Yeah, and the challenge of having to capture what you see in a matter of 20 minutes max.
Yes.
Right?
Right.
So you've got 20 minutes.
So you can't be too
fussy. The wind's blowing.
Oh yes.
The weather's changing. All sorts of things are happening, and then there's something about. If I take a photograph, I may look at the photograph years later and think, oh, I don't even remember taking that photograph.
Right.
But if I look at a sketch,
you're going to feel that wind again and that wetness.
You smell it.
Yeah.
You feel it. You're there, right? Yeah. So that's why the sketches are so important to me. Not that they're on their own beautiful pieces of artwork. It's just the fact that that takes me right back.
Memory. Yes.
Yeah. That's my really good memory. Mm-hmm.
Next for Diane, then? Out of these, are you going to be doing a series based on that geography or family or?
Well, Iceland is all about trolls and elves and all sorts of mythical characters.
Right.
So not necessarily right up my alley, but I could certainly take a riff on it, right?
Well, because it's storytelling and it's imagination to be, and it's fanciful.
That's right, and it's a part of their life.
Yeah.
Like it is actually a part of their life, which I find intriguing. But I also really, really like the idea of working internationally. So finding opportunities to work with like Icelandic artists, or and maybe just kind of learning from each other a little bit too. So I'm going to explore maybe some possibilities using the connections that I have, and they're very much in the world of art in Iceland. So it's kind of fun to make those connections and see if that will lead to some sort of a collaborative effort.
Can't walk away without saying that, Triart really appreciates. You've been a teacher, you've worked in the store, you're friends with people that are in the company, and you're a great ambassador.
Yeah, well,
for the products
I mean,
that we make.
Having Triart in Kingston is just tremendous.
Yeah.
Like, that's really special.
We want to thank you, and it's been a pleasure.
It's been a pleasure for me too, Connie. Thank you.
There we go.